We're almost there, ladies and gentlemen. Truly, you can see the finish line. We have been through the twists and the turns that has been a tumultuous college football offseason, but we could see the checkered flag waving, and thus await to Thursday night where the SEC is back on our television screens. College football is back, and all is right in the world. And some of you are sickos like me and have already planned out your day. You know exactly what you're going to wear for your first college game day attire. You know what you're going to have as your first meal. You've mapped out your beer schedule for what to watch on the first weekend of college football. We just got 10 days to wait until then. But there is one more thing we got to talk about, and it is something that comes up every single offseason, and I would be remiss if we didn't do it on this channel. The what if scenarios. There's a bunch of things that could create a domino and ripple effect that could transpire and ultimately shake up the course of college football as we know it. And these are some scenarios that I don't think will happen, but just humor me. What if they do? So what's going on, SEC Unfiltered? It's Cole Thompson. Make sure that you like the video. Hit the ring notification down below. That way you don't miss a single episode of SECU. And of course, hit subscribe because this is your new home for all things SEC football. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Make sure that you leave a 5-star review. That way you help boost up our numbers. And also make sure you're following us on the social channels. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. If you want to yell at me for making a bad what-if prediction, it's at Mr. Cole Thompson. And to keep up with the #1 source for all things SEC, make sure you visit SECUnfiltered.com. This episode's brought to you by Roback. Use promo code SECU for 20% off all joggers, polos, hoodies, shorts, much, much more. Look good, feel good this upcoming fall on game days with Roback.com. Using promo code SECU. Now, let's just get this out of the way. I'm not saying that these predictions or these what ifs are going to happen. In fact, I would be very shocked if most of these were to come true. But we have in the past gone out there, thrown out a line, tried to reel in the big fish and said, okay, well, maybe it's not going to bite. And then at the last second, oh boy, you were right. And some of these are not bad predictions. Like, what if Carson, Beck, and Quinn Ewers weren't even at their full potential last year? Like, what if we get to see the true version of them? Carson Beck, last season for Georgia, takes over for a 2-time national champion winner in Stetson Bennett. And he goes through battle in camp, and he's actually toe-to-toe with Brock Vandagriff, separates himself at the very end, and he balls out. And you keep asking yourself, well, when is he going to come back down to reality? When is he going to have his blundering moment? When is he going to create a mistake? And he never really did. He was cool, calm, collective in every single moment. But he doesn't have a security blanket in Brock Bowers anymore. And he doesn't have a speedster in Lab McConkey anymore. But what if now we see him actually enhance his numbers? It's year 2 underneath Mike Bobo's system. It's a second season in Athens as the starting quarterback. And on top of that, there is still a great cast of characters around him. He may not have the leading man and the great supporting actor that wins Academy Awards, or in this case, Bolitnikoff Awards, but he's got some dudes. It's not like the cupboard is bare in Athens whatsoever. And even though they did lose Ra Thomas, they still have Dominic Lovett, Colby Young, London Humphreys. Ben Urasek comes on over from Stanford. Probably Kirkland brand Brock Bowers for my money. You also throw in Trevor Etienne out of the backfield. Not to mention what you have with some young up-and-comers, Dylan Bell, Oscar Delp. You're in a pretty good situation. And what if Carson Beck now feels more comfortable in Mike Bobo's system to where he is making throws that last season he was a little bit risky to make? We're talking Heisman Trophy. We're talking one of the greatest quarterbacks that we've seen in 2024. And the same thing goes in Austin with Quinn Ewers. What if now that you don't have Adonai Mitchell as a security blanket or Jatavian Sanders across the middle of the field, you don't have Jonathan Brooks or CJ Baxter or truly Xavier Worthy that might go down as one of the more underappreciated players on the 40 acres? What if he says, you know what? Time to get to work. There's reason to believe it. There's many a fine folk in Austin who believe that Arch Manning is the starting quarterback for the long term, and eventually that Ewers is going to make a mistake. What if he doesn't? What if with this new bunch of supporting characters like Silas Bolden and Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond, quality players, really talented dudes, are all playing second fiddle because number 3 is making their job easy? Perfect ball placement. Elite accuracy. He's not afraid to tuck and run it on 3rd and short. He's now picking up those first downs. He's now delivering that crushing blow. And here comes Texas showing on up where many people are now changing their opinions about not having a great run game. And it's like, oh, we didn't need it. Because you want to know why? We had number 3. It was year 3. It was time for him to finally shine. He did. Texas is going to the playoff. Texas isn't just going to the playoff. They're making a statement in year one of the SEC and showing everybody, yes, we do mean business, friends. And by the way, this is just the start. We got the NIL collective. We got the funds. By the way, we now have the SEC logo attached to our name. When we were recruiting top 10 classes just like you, how you going to stop us now? How are you going to really slow us down now? Just what if these two quarterbacks were somewhat held back last year and now Pandora's box is open and all chaos breaks out? Another what if that's a probable long-term shot. I don't see it happening, but what if Cam Coleman already has established himself as the best wide receiver in all the SEC? This was a kid that immediately decided to hitch his wagon to the plains of Auburn once Jimbo Fisher was fired down in Texas A&M. And the second he arrived on campus, everyone took one look at him and said, oh, you're the alpha now. Yep, that's okay. We completely understand. They added in some really good wide receivers this offseason. Robert Lewis from Georgia State being one, and Keandre Lambert-Smith being another. I really like Rivaldo Fairweather. That's a great tight end. Those three alone are already upgrades from what you had last season. Not to mention you bring in Perry Thompson. Not to mention as well, you also bring in Percy Lewis, which now does wonders for your offensive line because you now have stability at the left tackle position, where last season you didn't really like having to play Dylan Wade. Now he gets to move inside to guard. But what if just automatically Cam Coleman arrives? Makes life easy for Peyton Thorne. We're talking about a team that maybe flies under the radar. This is an offense that is going to, I think, cater to Peyton Thorne's strengths. Number one, it has to because it's year two. Usually when you've been at your job for an entire year, you're either going to get better or you're going to be fired and someone's going to come in and replace you. So the leash is already tight enough around number one's throat. But what if he makes his job a breeze? You remember a quarterback by the name, remember a wide receiver back from Miami, Florida in 2012, came on into the University of Alabama, decided to immediately catch fire, take his team to a national championship, and basically establish himself as one of the best wide receivers in all of college football. Yeah, Amari Cooper did that, and then he did it for the next 2 years before becoming a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. Cam Coleman's got that same route running. Cam Coleman's got that same vertical speed. Cam Coleman's got the ability to win at every level of the field. So what if he already has established himself as the best wide receiver on campus at Auburn? But what if he's established himself right alongside names like Trey Harris? How about Luther Burden? How about we go even a step further and say maybe like a Jeremy Bernard? Many people are saying is going to be the breakout wide receiver of 2024. What if it's Cam Coleman? How much are we talking about Auburn being a team that's going from maybe a college football playoff contender in 2025 to a national championship one? But not all of these what ifs are promising. Some are actually somewhat negative. Like, what if Nico IS is the reason Tennessee goes 8-4? I'm not saying that Tennessee can't go 8-4. They easily could. You look at their schedule, they got games against Florida. That's always been a struggle. They got games against Alabama on the third Saturday in October. I would not be sleeping on NC State or Oklahoma, but they went out and they added in the right pieces. They got Zalance Hurd. That's a future starting left tackle in the NFL. They brought in Holden Staes. That's a security blanket at tight end that balled out last year. Chris Brazel's now there. He's making circus catches in practice. You get Deontay Thornton on a campus. That's a 6'5" mismatch nightmare for most quarterbacks. So they have the pieces. What if they're still 8-4 and it's because Nico just isn't as advertised? How many fine folks down in Knoxville are going to say, we made the wrong call at quarterback? They're going to already want to pull the plug and say, this isn't it. We put way too much pressure on it. Did you hear what I just said? Way too much pressure? Because I've already told you guys throughout this entire offseason, I've loved what I've heard about Tennessee. I've loved what I've seen on just minor films and from what people have told me from the league about what Tennessee's going to be. I think that they're a prominent team that may be on the outside looking into the college football playoff, or that sleeper that puts up monumental points and you're just saying to yourself by mid-November, we can't keep them out. They're too much fun. They're exactly what's needed for the college football playoff. But I've also said that you have to look at Tennessee as a team because I haven't heard much about them. I've heard about Nico. I've heard about what Nico did in the bowl game. I've heard about what Nico's done in practice. I've heard that Nico's won over the locker room. I've heard that people are upset that Nico's last name can't be pronounced right. It's Iamaleava. Let's just go ahead and get that straight. I've heard everything under the sun about Nico, but I've yet to hear about the offensive line. I've yet to hear about the running back room or the linebacker room, two areas that are massively unknown compared to everywhere else. I haven't heard as much about the wide receiver room as I wanted, but I've heard about number 8. That pressure that we were talking about, what if Tennessee fans put too much on and he didn't deliver? And he wasn't the next Hendon Hooker in year 1. Are people going to say, well, we got to move off? We got 2 kids waiting in the wings. Maybe they're the next option for Josh Heupel. What if they start blaming Josh Heupel? Nico will be fine. I promise you, Nico will be fine if you go 9-3, 8-4, 10-2, 11-1. Nico will be fine. But you have to remember, this is a first-year starter playing in the SEC. Most people would absolutely flop under this type of pressure. And you're already crowning him the next Hendon Hooker, which finally we're actually giving respect to Hooker on. Maybe let's temper that back just a little bit, because the problem is the higher the rise on the pedestal, the harder the fall from grace. Maybe there will be some people that will say Nico IS didn't take us to the playoffs. We don't believe that he is the future of what we see in Knoxville. There's some other negatives. Like, what if South Carolina's portal class doesn't hit? You know what's really funny is that South Carolina has kind of been flying under the radar. They've been a really interesting team this offseason because I bet you didn't know that they were top 20 in transfer portal rankings. Brought in 22 recruits, more players in the offensive line, more players at the wide receiver position, some players defensively. You do realize that the offensive line and wide receiver were absolutely a chaos of prism last year. You had Xavier Legette, not much else. You didn't have anything on the offensive line. You were probably better off playing, at most times, refrigerators and actually moving the refrigerators downfield and placing it for Spencer Rattler and immediately just getting a ball to be hiked to him in some capacity. You were probably in a better situation there than what you had last year. And I'm not taking shots at you, South Carolina. I'm just calling it as it is. Do you feel better about what you have right now with the offensive line going into year 4 underneath Shane Beamer? How about the running back room? Rocket Sanders, can he blast off? You're hearing positive things about him coming out of camp. What about Oscar Attaway? This was a really good running back for the Mean Green. Now he's going to be playing for the Big Spur. Can he deliver on Saturdays as a number 2 player? What about wide receiver just in general? Who steps up as the number 2 guy? Is it maybe Jacobs, the transfer from FSU? Is it Campbell, the guy that comes on over from Nevada? How about Jared Brown, the wide receiver from Coastal Carolina? Had some pretty good numbers last year for the Chanticleers. Is he stepping up? Who's going to be that security blanket for Lenore Sellers when it's 3rd and 3, they send an all-out blitz, and you need to get the ball out of your hands? Or do you not have that this year? And so what happens if now you start losing games because maybe you added in a lot of transfers, but the quantity and the quality didn't seem to match up? And so you lose to Kentucky, you lose to LSU, you lose to Texas A&M, you lose to Alabama, Oklahoma, and your only win right now is Vanderbilt. Does that put more pressure on Shane Beamer? Is that enough to go ahead and say, unfortunately, while we love what Beamer ball is, we got to show you the door? Is that enough for maybe Lenore Sellers to say, I'm not envisioning this program, I have to do what's best for me and go elsewhere? What does it do? What happens if the transfers aren't as good as polished? Because if I like this class, I like their recruiting class this year. I really do like their defense. I think they have a stud at Tonka Hemingway. I think they have a stud in the secondary. I love what they have at linebacker with Debo Williams. But everything starts and ends with the quarterback. Did you do enough this offseason, whether that be with newcomers like Nick Harbor stepping up, going into another season, whether that be like a Campbell or Jacobs, whether that be the running back room, to take pressure off of what you see with Sellers? Did you sell the program enough to get the right players in the building for Columbia, South Carolina, and Willie B to be on fire on Saturday nights? Because if so, I think South Carolina is that wild card team. I've been on record saying that. I won't be surprised to see what they do. I also won't be surprised to see if none of them actually end up panning out. How about another what if in a positive light? What if Connor Weigman and Texas A&M don't miss a beat on offense with Colin Klein? What if just immediately you remember, oh yeah, this was a 5-star quarterback who suffered a foot injury, the first injury of his entire career in college. So not an injury-prone quarterback, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just go ahead and set the record straight there. What if he just immediately needed an offseason to get back on the course? Just pick himself back up, brush himself off, ride the horse into the sunset. And what if now, because if he has Donovan Green that was not playing in 2023 because he tore his ACL in practice, that chemistry is right back to where it was in 2022 down the stretch? What if Moose Muhammad now, he doesn't have to worry about his sleeves and if he's going to play because Jimbo Fisher didn't like them? What if he finally breaks out? And what if all these pieces alongside Colin Klein, one of the masterminds of the offenses of the Big 12 last year, end up hitting? Weigman's an athlete. Just go ahead and remember that, ladies and gentlemen. He was going to be a dual sport player, baseball and football, before he immediately turned his attention to only football to better his craft, because if he realized what the talent is, go listen to people talk in the NFL circles, what they think about number 15 in College Station. I promise you, it's not this, maybe mid-round pick that doesn't pan out. No, it's day one. It's a Thursday night, and it's called franchise. Go ahead and look it up. There's a lot to like about what Connor Weigman does. And we already know that this defense is going to be more fundamentally sound and more secure than the bank in Wayne Enterprises underneath Batman. We know that is going to be sound because of who's the one calling the show. You look at the names that were brought in this offseason, especially Nick Saban. You may have the defensive SEC player of the year on your sidelines. If that offense hits, we're talking similarly to how we do about Auburn, where you don't really have that many questions anymore. Now it's just about, can you hang around with the big boys? Can you punch it in against an LSU? Can you punch it in against maybe an Auburn on the road? Can you punch it in against Texas for the first time in over a decade? And if that's the case, Connor Weigman a dark horse to win the Heisman Trophy? I'm not saying put your money on it, but if you were to go ahead and maybe put down a few bets, it wouldn't be the worst idea out there. Speaking of what ifs, in a positive but maybe negative light, what if Florida goes 6-6 this year? But what if they go 6-6 and Graham Mertz is fine, but he's not elite, and Billy unfortunately loses a game to Kentucky and he loses to Tennessee, but he wins the state of Florida and wins all 3 games? What does morale look like there? What does the opinion change? Because there's one thing that you can look at. He's not gotten his team to the right pathway of what many envisioned in year 3. You look at Brian Kelly going into year 3, we're having conversations about 10-win seasons, play opportunities for the college football playoff. We're in Gainesville, Florida. We're begging just to go to a bowl game. That's the way that we're talking. But you win against Mario in week 1. You win at the end of the year against Mike Norvell and against the Seminoles that many people believe is going to win the ACC. And you win against now a Power 4 program in UCF, Gus Malzahn. Maybe get 2 more wins in the process, and then, of course, Sanford. What's morale look like then? Because you won the state. There's going to be kids that come to those games, whether they be in Tallahassee, whether they be in Miami, whether it be in Gainesville, whether they be in Orlando, and they're going to say, but you guys were a little bit better off. You guys were more potent in the recruiting trail. You guys were more balanced on the transfer portal. Look at the names that you brought in UCF. Look at the names you brought in Miami. We were told that Miami, this was the year. They had an SEC defensive line apparently, and their offensive line could go toe-to-toe with anybody in the conference. But they couldn't stop Florida. But what about ACC football? The Seminoles, they were left out of the college football playoff last year, but couldn't stop Florida. UCF, they were supposed to be a dark horse for the Big 12, but couldn't stop Florida. Is that enough to save you, Billy? Is that enough for fans to start buying in? Is that enough for Scott Strickland to say, just give him 1 more year? The DJ Lagway era is upon us. Full-time, none of this Chris Leak, Tim Tebow 2.0 malarkey. Let's just go ahead and see what unfolds. Is that enough to bring morale up to where you think you have the right guy? Because I think that sometimes when you give up on a coach too early, it comes back and bites you even bigger than you thought. Sometimes if you wait for that 4th year, that last quarter, that 15 minutes, there's something about you. The inertia starts piling up. Maybe it's enough to go ahead and guarantee you a spot, at least in the conversation for a college football playoff. Speaking of which, not probably making the college football playoff, but certainly could be the joker that pulls the last laugh on a lot of these teams. What if Kentucky gets back to BBW? I know that many of you have made a sexual innuendo on that one, but we're not going that way. What we're doing is the big blue wall. One thing that we've known about this Kentucky Wildcat team for years is that they know how to have a big blue offensive line wall. They have it on the defensive side. It's headlined by Deion Walker. But what about the offensive side? What if Gerald Mincey just wasn't a good fit at Florida and he never found his footing in Knoxville, but Lexington, Kroger Field, that's always been home. What about if you look at other names that were added in this offseason? I don't know. How about we talk about the new right guard? Left guard. And Jalen Farmer, transfer from Florida. What if Gainesville wasn't right for him, but Lexington was? And then you throw in a very underrated wide receiver room headlined by Barry Brown and Dane Key, plus Jamori Macklin comes on in. Brock Vandergrift feels like an ideal fit for Bush Hamden's offense. And the defense, once again, yes, they had some question marks in the secondary. Yes, it was not up to par, according to what we know about is supposed to be the standard in Lexington. But what if you get better play from DJ Waller now coming on in? And Jamon Dumas-Johnson coming on in. He is that pop. And JJ Weaver is that jackbacker that delivers the crushing blow. And then you win week 2. It's a fork in the road week, ladies and gentlemen. I truly believe it. For both sides, South Carolina and for Kentucky. This could be the one game that beats you off a beaten path. This could be the one game that elevates you to new heights. Because in week 3, both these teams play very prominent programs. One goes and plays off against LSU. The other face off against Georgia. What if that inertia kicks on in and they start feeling really confident? They start building up that energy. And now they're sitting at 2-1 with one of the biggest upsets in college football through the early stages of September. I'm just saying, you got an offensive line. You can open up some creases. There's a lot, in my opinion, that mirrors Will Levis 3 years ago. You saw what you had up in Lexington underneath Liam Cohen. 3 years, we know what history says. History going to repeat itself at Kroger Field in 2024. Don't say I didn't warn you when it does. How about LSU's defense? Dumpster fire last year, right? They didn't do anything in the transfer portal. Almost nothing. They've been criticized by many people in the national media. Yours truly hasn't, but many other people have. What if their defense is slightly above average? Just what if their defense is slightly above average? It can't be worse than last year. They hit rock bottom in Baton Rouge. It was the most daunting, dreadful, lackluster, unwatchable season in a long time for those fine folks that believe in Tiger Stadium. It was hard to see. But Matt House was shown the door. Brian Kelly literally cleaned house, and he brought in new faces. You brought in Blake Baker. You brought in Corey Redmond. You brought in Bo Davis on the defensive line. What if the teachers are better than the students? What if the teacher that maybe you had last year was working with average students to get average grades? But now you get an elite teacher that takes below average students, bumps their grade up by a point and a half. So you get C-type players and they turn into B-plus talent. Would you be okay with that if you took off maybe 150 yards in the offense from a season ago, 10 points off, if it gave you 10 points back on defense and 150 yards back on defense? And maybe now instead of ranking 78th and 98th and 101st in certain metrics, you rank 51st, 48, 61. Same offense, probably top 25 in rushing, passing, attacking. They have the offensive line to do it. Many people don't want to believe it, but if you have an offensive line, you stand a chance in a college football playoff game, especially when it's fully healthy and it's in the month of December and bodies are beaten and bruised. Yeah, when you have guys like Emory Jones and Will Campbell leading the charge, you might have a little bit of a shot. Your defense is average. LSU might be a team that is the dark horse to win it all. They really might. And that goes down to teaching, fundamentals. Sometimes it's great to have the teachers. Sometimes it's great to have the students. It's always great to have both. But oftentimes, if I can get somebody that's going to find a way to get the best version out of the lackluster students, I'll take the teachers 10 out of 10. How about Alabama? What if Alabama this year, just this year, does suffer from the Nick Saban hangover? Just what if? I don't think this happens. I'm going to make this abundantly clear. I don't see this scenario happening. But what if this does happen? Where we have all this hype coming into the offseason. There's a lot of positivity. They bring in Ryan Williams. They get a couple of new transfers. The offensive line feels pretty confident. Caden Proctor is back. You go bring in Parker Brailsford. Your defense is going through a little bit of an adjustment, but you feel confident, and it's 9-3, 8-4. And Jalen Milroe looks fine in the offense, but it's a little bit oversaturated from what we imagined it to actually be. And Ryan Williams takes a full year to get used to the style of brand of passing attack. And Jeremy Bernard is a good receiver, but not a great receiver. Kobe Pretense, maybe he ends up being something. Maybe not. Maybe the rushing attack is okay. What if an injury occurs and that Nick Saban luxury tax that was depth ends up actually really costing the Crimson Tide? The thing that nobody wants to admit is that offensive line, as good as it is with the starting five, you got one other guy. You got one person. Years past, you just felt like it was a plug-and-play replacement for Alabama. Okay, cool. We lost our left tackle. Great. We'll just go ahead and burn the redshirt freshman. He'll be an All-American by the season's end. Oh, we lost our starting center. No worries. We got a dude that transferred in to sit after 3 years of starting. He'll be an All-SEC member. They don't have that right now. That's the one thing. What I will say is there will be people in Tuscaloosa that will immediately raise the pitchforks and light the flames and say, we made the wrong hire. Kalen DeBoer, you're on thin ice. And that's wrong. That's almost egregiously, moronically, stupidly wrong. In fact, I'll just tell you right now as an Alabama graduate to other Alabama fans out there, if you are one of those people, go ahead, leave your pin that said bandwagon fan at the front steps of Nick Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and don't show your ass back there. Because this will be the worst team that we have ever seen underneath Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. I truly believe that. He's got all the resources, he's got all the opportunities, he's got all the financial backing, and he still has that script A and the pedigree that is Crimson Tide football at his disposal. You don't think for 1 second that he'll be able to sell kids like he already has? You woke up in the middle of June and said, oh my God, did Nick Saban come back? No, it's Kalen DeBoer showing you what he's made of before the start of SEC Media Days. That's what you get to look forward to for the next 10 years, buddy. One bad year or underachieving year does not define your success. And it shouldn't define how we view Kalen DeBoer's era in Tuscaloosa, especially after one season, especially after 17 seasons of what we knew about Nick Saban, the greatest to ever do it. And finally, what if Missouri was a Cinderella team? What if Missouri last year went 11-2? They played out of their mind against Georgia. They were able to dismantle a team like Ohio State. They caught a few good breaks, and they really weren't as good as we thought. What if they really weren't as what we imagined? And this hurts me because I have high hopes for the Tigers this year. I have been embraced by the Tigers community right now. I have felt what this Tigers community can be. What if they're not actually what we imagine? Brady Cook, my apologies. Did a video talking about Connor Cook earlier today. What if Brady Cook can't cook? What if Luther Burden is a solid receiver, but unfortunately, he doesn't see eye to eye with his quarterback? What if actually losing Cody Schrader was more than just losing a running back? It was an aura about that locker room. It was that spark plug. It was, for some of you that actually know the wonders that has been the Marvel Cinematic Universe, what if it was the lock that held the timeline together? What if that was it in Como this past year? What if the defense takes a step back now that Blake Baker is no longer there, and they go 8-4? You know, Eli Drinkwitz might be one of the more predominant coaches right now, but don't make any mistakes. He's had some moments where literally there have been people wanting to show him the door. Are we back on that train if you go 8-4 after going 11-2 and having a great offseason with this schedule? Are we back to thinking that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't meant to be in the long run? Who's to say? Actually, I got one more for you, just real fast. What if Oklahoma's offensive line is better than advertised? What if Oklahoma, with the quarterback that right now we are hearing reports, and it is true, he's struggling with the turnovers so far in practice, is not living up to expectations? Jackson Arnold, and I know I've said in the last video, Jackson Dart, I apologize. That's my mistake. Oklahoma Sooner Nation, I'm letting you know, I was wrong for doing that. My bad. But what if Arnold actually starts to hit his stride? What if these turnovers in practice, the ones are just because the offensive line is still trying to build a relationship together? What if somebody steps up, first game against Temple, pancake blocks an owl, and then you just see 500 passing yards in that game? Yeah, it's Temple. I get it. They're a bad program. But what if 4 weeks later, you go undefeated as you're leaving Auburn, Alabama in Jordan-Hare Stadium, a hostile environment, and now you're feeling really confident going into the bye week? And largely it's due to your offensive line. That defense isn't slowing down. That defense is good. You can go ahead and ask anybody that covers college football, that watches college football with their eyeballs. They'll tell you straight up, good defense. What if Bill Beatonbow has its offensive line up to pace? What if everything is just starting to click together at the right time? And Brett Venables has a great defense that's able to mitigate any type of passing attack against any team. And now we're looking going into the last month of the season, they're undefeated, and they got 2 games to worry about. Alabama and LSU to close out the year. And if they win one, they're 11-1. And they're in the college football playoff. I've seen crazier things happen before. I have seen monumental storylines that have completely revamped the entire world of college football. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that these what if scenarios are going to come true. What I am telling you is that these could be synopsises that alter the timeline of what we viewed college football. Here's the beauty of it all. I'm done talking. Now it's time to go ahead and see it on the field. But let me know in the comment section down below. What if scenario do you believe is the most to come true? Which is the one that you think is the biggest egregious overall mark? What if scenario would you have put in this list? Like, rate, review, subscribe. Make sure you're following us on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. Follow me on Twitter, at Mr. Cole Thompson. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. And to keep up with the #1 source for all things SEC, make sure you visit SECUnfiltered.com. Until next time, folks, we're 10 days out. I'm Cole Thompson. Later.